Blade of Calling refers to Melina as the one who walks alongside Flame. But what happens if she sits alongside Flame? What happens if you kill her at the very beginning of the game? With Fire's Deadly Sin and the Blood Flame glitch, this is possible. Now don't worry, she doesn't stay dead, and it doesn't ruin your game, but it does get us a really close look at what is a very unique death animation. With her dying breath, Melina casts one last incantation. A golden Erd tree erupts and remains here for a while, healing you in an AoE from all of the burn damage that you just took, giving you back some health over time. Melina can also cast this unique incantation if you summon her for the fight with Morgott, and while it's rare, she can cast this spell during the fight as well, not just when she dies. Gameplay and lore-wise, this is very similar to the spell Blessing of the Erd Tree, which also heals you with the Erd Tree's warmth and grace over time. And Melina, who was born at the foot of the Erd Tree, certainly has a really good claim to this powerful manifestation of its power, even if she does feel compelled, eventually, to burn it all away. In my last video about Miquella, we talked a lot about his unalloyed gold needles, which can be used to repel the influence of outer gods. Of course, you can give a needle to Millicent, who inserts it into her body to fight off the scarlet rot of the rot god, but you can also use the final version of this needle to repel the influence of the outer god of frenzy and remove the frenzy from your eyes. But what you might not have known is that the original item descriptions for this needle originally said that to repel the interference of the outer god, you should pierce this needle into your eyes. I wonder if they changed this detail so they wouldn't have to create a specific animation for it. Can you imagine? Number 3, did you know that the winged design of the Mausoleum Knights is clearly inspired by the armor of the winged hussars, who were the Polish cavalry between the years 1503 and 1702? User Faithlessness Lucky 55 shared this side-by-side comparison of the two on Reddit, and I love seeing just how similar their armor design is, because it's such a grand excuse to talk about why Elden Ring and Poland as well decided on such extravagant designs. So in Elden Ring, the winged ornamentation of the Mausoleum Knights is intended to evoke the Deathbird, and so this feathered part of their armor acts as, and I quote, a self-inflicted curse that ties their spirits to the land, and this is also that they might better serve their masters in death. And as for the Polish cavalry, the rear wings were intended to simply demoralize enemies during their charge, as the hussars were the elite of Polish cavalry, and I assume they were not a force that you would want to see charging your way. The Polish assembled these wings from the feathers of raptors. Raptors are a bird of prey who appear to exist in Elden Ring as well, as these are the birds that provided their feathers for the Ravenmount assassins in Elden Ring, who also evoke the Deathbird and actually have a chest piece called the Raptor's Black Feathers, which states that it is a ritual implement for transforming into a Deathbird, if only by imitation. Number 4 is something I decided not to mention in my video on Elden Ring's Cosmic Sorcerers, and it's that Radagon shares a very compelling connection with Raya Lucaria's Knights of the Cuckoo, who are the characters that bear this twinned cuckoo bird as their coat of arms. So a cuckoo is a bird that lays eggs in foreign nests so that other birds can raise its children instead. This, I discovered, is something called brood parasitism, which is kind of messed up when you think about it. Cuckoo birds even go so far as to push eggs and other baby birds out of the foreign nest so that there's less competition for their own offspring. And Radagon kind of exhibits this cuckoo behavior with Rennala. He doesn't go so far as to push other children out of the nest, but you could argue that he does use Rennala to birth 3 demigod children, only to eventually leave her with a parting gift of a giant golden egg, which Rennala would then treasure, seemingly at the neglect of all else. The egg is just such a curious symbol for this reason, and you could take this theory further and argue that Radagon Marika might have helped to establish the Knights of the Cuckoo. They were, after all, a part of the Academy for a very long time, and the Knights of the Cuckoo were established on behalf of the Academy. For one, the crest of the Cuckoo Knights is the twinned cuckoo, which, you could argue, represents the twinned body of Radagon and Marika. Second, the Cuckoo's surcoat item description even says that the Cuckoo knows the insignificance of physical bodies. Now, there is counter-evidence to this theory, and it's that the Cuckoo seems to date back to Nokstella, as there is a legendary Black Moon of Nokstella talisman that features that signature twin cuckoo design. So you kind of have to decide, did Radagon and Marika simply co-opt this ancient cuckoo icon for their own purposes, or is the cuckoo just its own thing and is coincidentally similar to the whole situation with Radagon and Renala's golden egg? Whatever the case, you have to admit that it is a pretty compelling theory, and it offers a very welcome bit of characterization for Radagon, this hero who only really appeared during the war with Liurnia, and I think you could argue that it was almost Radagon's sole purpose to get close to Renala and undo her from within. And another lore topic that I just keep talking about are the crucified folk that are found all throughout Limgrave. Many of these wear the Guilty Hood item, which has a description that reveals that it's the garb of those accused of lesser crimes, indicated by the collar of sharpened branches. But back in version 1.0 of the game, the description read that it was the garb of spurned Tarnished who were forced into slavery in the Lands Between. It goes on to say that the Tarnished have been wandering into the Lands Between from beyond the Sea of Fog in dribs and drabs since times of old. Most are killed on arrival, but the few unlucky survivors are taken as slaves. I wonder why this was changed. The 1.0 description seems so much better. For number 6, there are some interesting details on the Erdtree Sentinels as well. If you look close enough at them, you'll notice that they're actually chained to their horses. User Groomgrim on Reddit pointed out that if you look at their waist, you can see how an ornate chain wraps from around the sentinel down and then around the horse, which I think helps to explain, from a gameplay point of view anyway, why they can't be dismounted like other large enemies can be on horseback, like the Knights Cavalry. The Erdtree Sentinels, on the other hand, are unable to be separated from each other for a very good reason. So, one aspect of Elden Ring that isn't talked about very much is the game's hardness stat. This dictates whether or not a weapon will bounce off of an enemy when the weapon is wielded with one hand. Fextralife has a very helpful list explaining all of these tiers if you want to learn more, but what I really want to talk about is that, did you know that there's one enemy in the game that absolutely no weapon can match in terms of hardness? All hail the Crystal Crab of Raya Lucaria. Not even the Coded Sword, the Cypher Parter, or whips are a match for the hardness of its shell. Another lesser-known mechanic is called Overkill, and it's something that you can use to massively boost the amount of runes that you receive in-game. So this has actually been around in the Souls series for quite a while, but basically, if your first hit on an enemy does damage that exceeds 150% of their maximum HP, then you will receive 20% more runes as a result. This is a nice perk for strength builds or maybe magic builds that do a ton of damage in one hit, but in general, I think this mechanic exists because it kind of helps the game scale rewards to the strength of your character a little bit as you continue to level up and get stronger. But where this overkill mechanic really comes in handy is when you're engaging in rune farming. So 20% more runes is a lot when it comes to something like farming the Albinaurics at Mohgwyn Palace. So if you're currently not making use of this, you should consider ways to make your character just that little bit more powerful so that you can hit that threshold where you deal more than 150% damage in one go. For number 9, everyone knows about the Dectus Medallion at this point and how having two halves of it allows for easier access to the Altus Plateau, but did you know that's not all that it does? If you have this in your inventory, it also prevents the two Guardian Golems at the top from attacking you. For number 10, have you ever wondered why certain enemies drop bell bearings? Like, what even is a bell bearing, right? So, it's a term that, as far as I can tell, doesn't actually exist in the real world. When I first read it though, I thought it said ball bearing, and I thought it was referring to those little steel balls that go inside of an enclosure to serve a purpose like rolling to reduce friction or to roll inside of a pen and apply ink. So if I had to guess, a bell bearing might also be the little ball that goes inside of a ball bell enclosure, so that it might function as the clapper part of a bell, which is the part that gives the bell its ring. This would make sense, as we do give these bell bearings to the Twin Maiden husks, who are finger maidens that hold staffs that, if you look closely, are actually full of such ball bells. But why do we do this? Why do we give these maidens these bell bearings? Well, bells in the Elden Ring universe are a tool that can be used to summon or call to spirits. The best example of this is the spirit calling bell that the player uses, but this mechanic exists in other From Software games as well, like the bell ringing woman in Bloodborne, who also rings her bell for spirits to fight on her behalf. So when the Twin Maiden husks receive an NPC's bell bearing, we speculate that this enables us to interact with their spirit and learn additional spells from them, or receive their items as if they were still alive. After all, many bell bearings seem to kind of hold the essence of perished NPCs. They might have even been born or held by these NPCs, as many bell bearings appear to have like a fingerprint design upon them. So after really thinking about this for this video, I realized that the word bell bearing is quite an impressively loaded phrase for these little items. It suggests that it's part of a bell, it suggests that it's been born by an NPC or held, and it tells us that it provides a bearing, pointing one towards their spirit with a signature chime, perhaps. So really, props to the translation or the writing team for this one. I always find it beautiful when they use this kind of wordplay to describe things. So, number 11. Recently, Twitter user DiddyColo shared this video. And it seems like the statue in the shaded castle watches you whenever you have your back turned, only to turn away when you get closer. It's extremely creepy, until you figure out what's actually going on here. So after going to investigate, I realized that this was actually being caused by textures or assets being loaded in, depending on how close your character is to them. When getting closer, it's simply loading the assets that make it look like the statue is looking towards you. That's not to say this isn't creepy as hell. I remember something similar actually happened to me with the inanimate doll in the Hunter's Workshop in Bloodborne. I entered the room and I swear the doll's face moved and looked towards me, and it scared the absolute hell out of me. But now I finally understand why that might have happened. One thing I've always wondered about is the sequence of events that leads to you ending up in the Stranded Graveyard at the beginning of the game. Remember when you were defeated by the Grafted Scion and you heard this? It's as if you're dragged, then thrown through the air, only to be submerged underwater. And then you hear nothing until you finally awaken in the Stranded Graveyard. Now, what I always assumed that these sounds meant were that the Grafted Scion drags you after it defeats you, then throws you off the cliff into the ocean below. Then eventually I thought that your body might wash up towards this beach here at a sort of high tide, as this beach does have a cave that leads straight into the Stranded Graveyard, and I figured that it was here that Melina eventually finds your body. But another theory was recently proposed by Shieldscuff in a YouTube short that reveals that the Stranded Graveyard is actually right below this crevasse in Limgrave. Now, falling into this crevasse usually kills you, but if you fly the camera down there, you do arrive pretty much directly where your character awakens in the Stranded Graveyard. So, as the theory goes, our character, or at least the coffins that are placed nearby, these might have been hurled down here in years past into that crevasse. There is also a bunch of crucified bodies near the hole, which does kind of lend credence to the idea that this was a place that was used to dispose of tarnished or criminals. The counter-argument here, however, is that there isn't actually a hole in the roof of the stranded graveyard that aligns with this crevasse. I mean, there is a tiny hole, but I feel like that's not very convincing unless you argue that there was like a landslide and it covered it up. There are a few caves like this in Elden Ring, with clear holes in the ceiling that don't line up with the outer geography, and I feel like that is a huge missed opportunity by From Software. I think it would be really cool if you could fall into a hole and then end up in the middle of a dungeon and have to find your way out. So there's a free idea. For number 13, for a long time, amongst the high-level PvP community, people were noticing instances where they would block an attack and perfectly poise through it as well, without taking any knockback. Now, in PvP and PvE, this sort of technique, this sort of perfect blocking technique, could be extremely useful because it enables the player to take no damage and not take any movement penalty either, and just poise through an attack in order to deliver a punish or even a backstab. The only problem was that it wasn't known how to replicate this seemingly random event, or at least it wasn't until now. Thanks to a discovery by Discord user CMG, and thanks to videos showcasing it by Stilovsky and G9, we now know that to replicate this quote-unquote irregular poise event, what you have to do is be sprinting, and then take your finger off the sprint button and put it onto the block button in the exact frame where you would usually take damage. This performs a perfect block with poise, and it allows you to deliver a punishing blow. I've always craved some sort of Sekiro-style parry system in Elden Ring, so I was really excited to learn about this. It's difficult to perform, for sure, but it really does heighten the skill ceiling of the game, and that's usually a good thing. It must be hard being a game developer and learning about things like this though. Do you remove the unintended effect, or do you embrace when your game has the random emergence of complexities like these? I tend to prefer the latter. I still really wish that Elden Ring had some sort of chain casting mechanic that was actually baked into the game instead of being a bug. And speaking of the developers, I think we should give the animators in particular some credit. Like, yes, when the game first came out, a lot of people criticized them for reusing a lot of the animations that existed in previous games, but let's be honest, that's not really being lazy, that's just being more efficient, because these animators are not lazy. They clearly put a ton of effort into animating so many other things instead. For example, have you considered that almost every single enemy has a specific animation for falling and remaining asleep? I know this isn't really a secret, but I feel like it still bears mentioning. Every animal, so many enemies, and so many bosses, all of them have sleep effects designed specifically for them, even if it's extremely unlikely that any player would ever inflict sleep upon them. And I bring this up as well because in the recent Miquella lore video, we talked about how there used to be a mechanic where enemies could be found sleeping out in the world, and it was required for a questline to harvest that dream mist. There's a big part of me that wishes that this mechanic, or this questline, would be patched into the game, maybe for Saint Trina DLC? Or at least it would be cool to see animals or enemies just randomly falling asleep out in the world, so that all of these animations could be put to use. Speaking of sleep, have you ever looked up during your fight with Renala to see where the scholars are respawning from? Turns out they're all falling out of these hanging cribs. We've talked before in another secrets video about how these beings are being rebirthed through Renala's great rune of the unborn, and the scholars themselves have dialogue that talk about how they're being reborn within Renala's umbra, or the shadow of her moon, so to speak. But before I go, I'd like to quickly talk about Displate, who have just introduced a set of official Elden Ring designs. So having a nice setup space is really important to me, and hanging a set of displates on your wall can really help to add personality to a room. Displates are printed on metal, and the color and texture they achieve is really impressive, and these official Elden Ring designs just look fantastic, honestly. I love the shot of Godfrey and Vike in particular. If you recall, these artworks were first shown off back when Elden Ring was first announced, and they always give me this real nostalgia kick for that time whenever I see them. But there are way more official designs over on their website, so please, if you're interested, use the link in the description to purchase these, as that really does help me out, and please let me know which ones you pick up. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.